beautiful crook I've ever seen.
Why, thank you, kind sir. So I recognize you. I wouldn't want to go home with the wrong man by mistake now, would I?
It is a mass ball. We all go as someone else. I think we should pay our respects to the guest of honor, shall we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. North. 1, 2, 3. Down, down, down. Oh, here we are.
Oh.
You said you would tell me what the next job is. In 24 hours.
It's a bank.
And?
And I didn't say I'd tell you any more. Isn't it beautiful here? Of course, when I said bank, I didn't mean just any bank.
A room with a view.
I give you the world's tallest building
And we're going to steal it?
And home of the International Clearance Bank, which I'm sure you already know. You want a beer?
Thank you. We'll need 3 weeks to prepare.
What?
Minimum.
No, it has to be tomorrow night.
No way.
No, you don't understand. It has to be Millennium Midnight, or it's never.
Then it's never. It's impossible. It's impossible. But doable. I'm calling it off. You take this. I'll get the Rembrandt for you later.
Oh, slow down, Mac. What you saying?
She's over her head. It's not going to happen.
What about this other big, giant, huge job you all cute about in Scotland, Now, you wouldn't be trying to cut a brother out of anything, would you,
There's
Mac?
nothing to cut you out of.
You know, Mac, I think it's time to take your girlfriend out of the equation and get down into the you and me of it all.
She's not my girlfriend.
Was it amusing for you to watch how people reacted to him on the set?
Yeah, I mean, we shot in Britain, and so a lot of the guys had worked with him on different projects before, and there's a wonderful respect that surrounds him as an actor, more so than anything, but also as, you know, a person. He's very professional, you know, and there's this kind of like, shh, Sean's coming, you know, and the fact is he's like really cool with the crew and he chit-chats, but as soon as they say rolling, he's like, you know, professional down to the last little cell in his body.
I think cars are veering off and crashing because the drivers
Ooh la la,
are
Mamma
distracted
Mia.
there.
Yeah.
So is it ever amusing for you when movie studios come up with the ad campaigns and the posters to see how you're going to be featured in the poster?
Yeah, well, we did that photo shoot, and we pretty much, you know, did show. The idea was always there, Sean's face, me, and then me in different like poses, like whether it be with my legs wrapped around my neck or something, you know, stretched out. But it was funny that I went back after I was shooting the end of The Haunting here in Britain. I went back and I saw myself on a bus in America, across the bus. So I'm sitting in the car and the bus stops, and so my face is right here, you know, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm on a bus. That was really funny. My leg like sprawled out right to the driver's face, you know.
Producing and partly financing, the former James Bond has teamed up with Catherine Zeta-Jones, and they've certainly hit it off.
You should go out the room for a minute, actually. No, but she can dance, she can sing, she can move. Has a tremendous appetite to learn, works very, very hard, totally professional, and is an absolute joy.
No, I'm very honoured to work with somebody who not only is a fantastic actor and someone who I've admired, like so many, but is so giving, you know, and is willing to share everything and give so much back to you as an actor and as a friend that is just a dream.
It's a colourful, interesting thriller, which hopefully will be as appreciated as anything that one attempts to be witty.
Howdy, how's it going? Thanks for joining me. My name's Zav, and this time we're talking about the 1999 movie Entrapment, starring Sean Connery and Catherine Zeta-Jones. And this was a great movie from my youth. So I was 21 years old when it came out. I was in university. And, back in the 90s, it seemed like Sean Connery was pretty much the biggest star around. And, it's kind of crazy to say because he was 69 years old when this movie came out. And, it seemed like he could just keep on going on forever. But it was only a few years after this that he abruptly ended his career. So, they talk about you don't know what you've got until it's gone, or taking things for granted. Back in the 1990s, I guess I took a lot of things for granted. And not only me, I'm sure many people. Basically, the 1990s was a golden era for cinema. You had so many great comedies, so many great action, adventure movies. You had all these superstar actors. You had, young talents, but you also had these legends that were still hanging in the game, and none of them were bigger than Sean Connery. I mean, he was, I think he was paid $20 million or something for A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which came out a few years after this, and that was his final movie. So yeah, he retired in 2003. That was 4 years after Entrapment. And, in hindsight, maybe he should have retired after Entrapment, because this would have been a real high note to end on. A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I've watched bits of it a long time ago. Sean Connery looks cool in the scenes he's in, but by all accounts, that's not a good movie. And, even though the movie actually made money, so it made 170 million at the box office, and it made more on DVD sales. And I think I read that it made another 70 million in DVD sales. Like these days, you couldn't make that kind of money on DVD sales, but back 20 plus years ago, DVD sales were still a big thing. So anyway, financially, Sean Connery's final movie did fairly well. Not as well as the studio wanted, but it wasn't actually a box office bomb. It made money. It was a critical bomb, and basically, yeah, even fans of Sean Connery were disappointed with that movie. But he's still kind of cool in it. So if you are a true Sean Connery fan, still probably worth checking out A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And he was in a movie in 2002, Finding Forrester. That's a pretty good movie. It's kind of like a Dead Poets Society or Good Will Hunting kind of vibe. Not quite as good as those other two movies, but definitely, yeah, that was a good one. So in general, Sean Connery did end his career on a high note. But for me, but really the last super cool movie that he was in, the last, awesome movie was Entrapment. And I think most people who've watched this movie, they like it. Some people say it's forgettable, popcorn fun. But for me, this is a memorable one. And, maybe had something to do with the age I was at. So I was 21 and big fan of Catherine Zeta-Jones. She just come out in The Mask of Zorro 1 year earlier, 1998. So you had, to my thinking, the world's most beautiful woman, and very sexy, charismatic, humorous. So she was on top of her game. And you had Sean Connery, who was, probably not on top of his game, certainly physically not on top of his game. I mean, he's a Mr. Universe contestant in the 1960s, was it, or 1950s? I mean, before he became James Bond, he had this incredible body, so literally incredible body. Now he has an incredible body of work in his amazing career, but he was always known as having this incredible physique, so a bit like Schwarzenegger. But unlike Schwarzenegger, I don't think Sean Connery ever did steroids. So, yeah, but physically, clearly not at the top of his game. But in terms of his confidence, in terms of his voice, I mean, he always had one of the most iconic voices. I think many people would say Sean. If you took a questionnaire around the world and asked people what's the most iconic, what's the coolest, most awesome, machismo, voice you can think of, I think Sean Connery would come out number one. At least for millennials, Gen X, my generation, and older people, Sean Connery definitely one of, if not the coolest voice ever. And yeah, he was rocking in this movie. So, the big controversy about this movie was the fact that Connery was 69 when the movie came out. So I guess he turned 70 the year 2000 here. And Sean Connery passed away just a few years ago. He passed away 2020 at age 90. So he had a great long life. And basically his retirement was 20 years. So a lot of people, including myself, thought that he retired too early. But some great actors, they like to go out on top. And pretty much Sean Connery did go out on top, as I said. Other actors that come to mind that kind of decided to quit while they were ahead were Gene Hackman, Jack Nicholson. So fans of Connery, Hackman, Nicholson, we kind of wished that they would keep making movies, but they sort of just suddenly stopped. What was one of my favorite Gene Hackman movies was The Royal Tenenbaums. Maybe that is my favorite Gene Hackman movie. And Entrapment would be top 3 Sean Connery role. At the time of the Entrapment being released, of course, a lot of people talked about the very significant age gap between Connery and Catherine Zeta-Jones. So she was, I think she was 30 when the movie was released, but she was 29 when they filmed it. And Connery was 69 when it was released, 68 when they filmed it. So basically a 39-year age gap. If many people have said, and I agree with this, that if it had been any other actor, it would have been a bit creepy. And, I'm sure some people think it was creepy as it was, but Connery just had the X factor. I mean, it's, like a cliche. People said men wanted to be him and women wanted to be with him. Yeah, he was an old man and he was playing, a kind of elderly statesman, grandfatherly figure. They don't shy away from his age in the movie. I mean, they play it down a little bit. They mention at the start of the movie that he's 60 years old. So they kind of cut out 9 years there. For example, during the training montage scenes, so he has this castle in Scotland, he's playing Scottish, and famously, Sean Connery can't do accents. So even in like The Hunt for the Red October, where he's supposed to be Russian or Soviet, he does his usual Scottish accent. But again, because his voice is so iconic and because, some people, they just have it. If you critically dissect him as an actor or his voice or his maybe limited range, there's plenty to criticize. But basically, he was the best. He was the coolest. He was the most confident, macho actor that's ever been. And, it's very hard to imagine someone like Connery coming along in this era. I mean, for example, he dropped out of school when he was 12 years old. I mean, who drops out of school when they're 12 years old now? Certainly, you don't see the big stars in Hollywood like that now. During this training montage, he's jogging and he's sort of out of breath, and you can see that he's got a fairly big stomach on him, and he loved his food, he loved his alcohol, he loved to play golf. But anyway, the age is mentioned in the movie, even though they say he's 60, and they don't really talk about Zeta-Jones' age. So she doesn't look super young, so she was almost 30, but extraordinarily beautiful woman. To my opinion, in this movie and The Mask of Zorro and a few other movies that came out during that era, she was the most beautiful actress. And, beauty's not all about the face. I mean, of course, plenty of models look good, but they can't act. So it's her husky voice, it's her cheeky smile, it's her playfulness, it's her sharpness, her willing to banter. She's got the X factor too. I would say Sean Connery, one of, if not the most charismatic actor of all time, and Catherine Zeta-Jones, one of the sexiest, coolest, cheeky, fun actresses. And she had a great run in the late 90s, early 2000s. She's still acting now. She was in the Wednesday TV series on Netflix, and that's quite popular. But this was like a really, golden moment for her. Those 5, 6, 7 years, late 90s, early 2000s. And, people thought, it's unbelievable that she would be, in the movie, she's very much pursuing Connery's character. And I think that was a wise choice. If he were pursuing her, it would definitely have a much creepier vibe. Again, the 39-year-old age gap. But kind of similar to, To Catch a Thief, Cary Grant and Grace Kelly, or what was the other one with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn? 1963 Hitchcock movie Charade. So in that movie, Cary Grant is, significantly older. I forgot the age gap between him and Audrey Hepburn. It is a criticism that comes up often that, Hollywood often casts older male stars with much younger female stars. And, I understand. But, now the pendulum's kind of swing the other way. I mean, I've noticed, for example, Nicole Kidman. I'm not sure how old she is, but she's been doing a series of movies where she's quite a bit older than her male co-stars. There was one recently, I forgot the name, with Zac Efron. So Nicole Kidman, much, much older than Zac Efron. But for a long time in Hollywood, it was kind of a common trope that you'd have these, legendary aging actors, and they would be with much younger, gorgeous female co-stars. This movie only works because it's Sean Connery. He's the exception. So even though he was almost 70, but you believe the attraction between him and Zeta-Jones. And, what makes it even more believable is that clearly Catherine Zeta-Jones did like older men, because this movie was filmed in late 1998, and in the middle of 1998, she actually met Michael Douglas, and Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones, they share the same birthday, but Michael is 25 years her senior. So Catherine's actual husband, 25 years older. The thing about the James Bond character that he legendarily started. I mean, the books are written by Ian Fleming, but if Connery hadn't been such a cool, iconic James Bond, then it's quite possible that the series, wouldn't have continued as it did. So he really launched the series. He was Bond for the first 6 movies, and after him, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig. I forgot the Aussie one, Lazenby. I'm from Australia. It's funny, ironic that I forgot the one Aussie who played Bond. You can say that James Bond is basically a male fantasy character. I mean, he's written by Ian Fleming as kind of his fantasy character of himself. Like, famously, a lot of James Bond was sort of based on Ian Fleming's experiences, working as a spy, working for the intelligence service, and World War II. And so, he didn't look like Connery, but, he did some cool stuff during World War II, and the whole 007 is very much a male fantasy. Of course, Connery's big break happened in 1962 when Dr. No came out, and then a bunch of Bond movies in the mid to late 1960s. And during that run, after a few movies, you know, Connery was naturally concerned about being typecast, so he tried to branch out and do different kind of characters. He was in a movie directed by Alfred Hitchcock, Marnie, in 1964. And then after You Only Live Twice in 1967, he said he was done, he was out, he'd had enough of playing Bond. And he only agreed to come back 4 years later in the movie Diamonds Are Forever after is it Eon, the producers, agreed to his $1 million ask. And he didn't think that they would pay him $1 million because this, you know, we're going back 60 years or something. No, sorry, we're going back 55 years ago. 55 years ago, you know, $1 million sounded completely absurd. So he assumed that the studio would turn that down, but surprisingly they said, okay. They were basically willing to do whatever it took to get Connery back as Bond. And apparently he donated most of that money, the $1 million that he got for Diamonds Are Forever, for some educational institute in Scotland. You know, he's always been a proud Scot. We can't talk about Connery without talking about James Bond. Can't talk about James Bond without Connery, because Connery made that role his own. And yeah, who knows what would have happened if those first few Bond movies, you know, 1960s, if they had been flops. It's very possible that the series would have, you know, ended dead in its tracks. I mean, it's likely that it would have been picked up some point later because, you know, Hollywood's always looking for ideas, and they probably would have brought out again. But because Sean Connery made those movies, you know, they were ridiculously successful. They were the, you know, financially the most successful movies in the 1960s, and that basically paved the way for Roger Moore. Roger Moore had a great run. I think he was in 7 James Bond movies. Yeah, so I believe Connery and Roger Moore both in 7 Bond movies, but officially Moore has more because one of Connery's movies was unofficial. I mean, it was unofficial only because it was made by a different studio. I won't go into the legal wranglings behind Never Say Never Again, which came out in 1983, the same year as Octopussy. So you had Roger Moore as James Bond and you had Connery as James Bond. Connery coming back after a 12-year hiatus. So you had 2 James Bond movies, officially both official, but some people don't count Never Say Never Again because it was made by a different studio. And, you know, they couldn't use the iconic James Bond music. But any old how, the big point there is that I started doing these movie reviews a week ago. So this is just my 5th movie review. What have I've done so far? Jurassic World Rebirth, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, 6 Days, 7 Nights, and then Romancing the Stone the other day. So when I talked about 6 Days, 7 Nights, I mentioned that for me, 6 Days, 7 Nights is kind of like Harrison Ford's unofficial, you know, Indiana Jones movie. And maybe other people have said something similar. I think it is a little bit of a reach because, of course, Indiana Jones is an archaeologist and it's set in the 1940s, 1950s. I mean, the original ones, 1930s, 1940s. I think Raiders of the Lost Ark was set during Nazi era, so early 1940s. And then Temple of Doom came out after Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it was actually a prequel. So I think Temple of Doom was set in the 1930s. But getting lost in the weeds, as usual. What I'm trying to say is that when I did that movie review, I actually misspoke because I said that 6 Days, 7 Nights is like a unofficial Indiana Jones movie for me. And the link is that it's, you know, jungle adventure movie. Harrison Ford's flying a plane, crashing a plane. In the Indiana Jones movies, he crashed a plane. There's romance, but 6 Days, 7 Nights is much more a romantic comedy. You know, and he's not an archaeologist, but it kind of feels like how I imagine if Indiana Jones retired and he went to live on some tropical island, Hawaii or Tahiti, that, he would just be enjoying chartering flights and exploring jungle islands or something. That's how I imagined Indiana Jones retiring. So, I'm not a big fan of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and the Dial of Destiny, and certainly I'm not alone with that opinion. I know many people are disappointed with the last two Indiana Jones movies. I don't hate those movies, and maybe I'll do a movie review on those at some point. But by far my favorite Indiana Jones movie is Temple of Doom. Anyway, of course, Sean Connery and Harrison Ford played father and son in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, so there's a link between Ford and Connery. And of course, the character of Indiana Jones was partly inspired by James Bond. George Lucas and Spielberg were big fans of Sean Connery during the 1960s. So when Lucas wrote the character of Indiana Jones, he had in mind something like an archaeologist version of Connery's Bond, which is why they asked him to play Indiana Jones' father in The Last Crusade. The Last Crusade is my second favorite Indiana Jones movie. And why is Temple of Doom my favorite? It's just got the most bonkers action. It's got the jungle. It's the sexiest one. It's the scariest one. It's got the most animals, like the crocodiles or the alligators at the end of the movie, and all the elephants. I love animals, obviously. I'm a bird nerd. That's why this channel's name is Bird Fari. And usually I try to somehow segue to birds in the movies, but it's difficult to do with Entrapment. However, there is a crow that appears briefly with Mac's castle, Connery's castle in Scotland. So there's a scene where he realizes that Jin is, trying to double cross him, and she goes off to a public phone and calls her boss at the insurance company, and Hector. And anyway, afterwards he tells her to go up to this ledge on top of his castle, and it's windy and cold and stormy, and she nearly slips over. She's wearing heels or high boots, and there's a crow atop Connery Mac's castle, and she nearly falls down off the ledge because she's scared by this crow. So, a little bit of a link there with birds. And you can actually hear at the end of the movie, you can also hear wild crows in Kuala Lumpur. There's the final scene at the train station in Kuala Lumpur where Ving Rhames and Connery, so Mac and Thibodeau, they're talking. They're just done their final deal, and Mac's handed him these super microchip prototypes that are $4 million or $5 million each. So it's like $20 million he just handed him. So they've finished their work together. He's kept his side of the bargain. In the background, you can hear crows. So only a true bird nerd would notice that minor detail. But yeah, I do like to link to animals or birds if I can. In this movie, it's very, very obscure, but crows appear in Scotland and Kuala Lumpur in this movie. So anyway, why I love Temple of Doom the most, several reasons, but one of them is the animals. But Last Crusade, definitely my second favorite. So number one, Temple of Doom, close behind The Last Crusade, and very much that is because of the banter, the father-son, Connery, Harrison Ford dynamic, which is, electric. So I love movies about friendship, I love movies about family, and I love romance. So Entrapment is much more a romance movie, but you have incredible chemistry between Catherine Zeta-Jones and Connery. In The Last Crusade, incredible father-son chemistry between Connery and Ford. So that's, even though I think the action in The Last Crusade not quite as exciting, and there's no jungle. I'm a big jungle person. There's no jungle that appears in The Last Crusade, But basically, Ford and Connery, they make Last Crusade a totally iconic movie. You Only Live Twice is by far my favorite James Bond movie, and probably my favorite Connery. It's very hard to say. Favorite Connery movies, yeah. You Only Live Twice, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Entrapment. Those would be the top three. Of course, he's great in many, many other movies, but and why I love You Only Live Twice. Well, it was filmed in Japan, and Japan looked incredible in that movie, and it was kind of amazing that they filmed in Japan, considering it was only 20 years after the end of World War II. Relations between Japan, America, UK, the West improved rapidly, and so Tokyo hosted the Olympics in 1964. And another Hollywood movie that was filmed in Japan in the 1960s, I mean, the only two that I can think of were You Only Live Twice, 1967, and Walk, Don't Run. That was Cary Grant's last movie. Crazy that Cary Grant's last movie was filmed in Japan, and that was based around the Olympics in Tokyo then. But yeah, after You Only Live Twice, Connery said never again. And then 4 years later, they got him back for Diamonds Are Forever for the right price, $1 million, which at that stage was by far the most money any actor had ever been paid for a movie. And then 12 years after that, 1983, he came back for Never Say Never Again. Depending on who you ask, some people consider Diamonds Are Forever as Connery's last run as James Bond. And then other people will say that, no, actually, it was Never Say Never Again. I mean, in truth, the answer is Never Say Never Again. That was his last run as James Bond, even though it was made by a different studio, and it was very crazy, unique legal battle that meant that two different studios were both making James Bond movies the same year. And actually, Octopussy with Roger Moore, that was Roger Moore's second last movie as Bond, made a bit more money. But both You Only Live Twice and Octopussy were successful, but yeah, people expected that was going to be a slam dunk huge hit for Connery, because there was great anticipation about that. But in reflection, I think most people consider Never Say Never Again a bit of a disappointment. There were some, high notes. For me, I loved the Griffin Vultures, Kim Basinger, gorgeous in that movie, and Connery had some cool lines. Some of the dialogue was cool, and it had a good villain, but it had a very strange computer game sequence which has aged badly. And speaking of, Entrapment, I think has aged well. Never Say Never Again, I'd say that movie has aged quite badly. But if you're a Connery fan, you have to watch that movie. And if you're a James Bond fan, you have to watch that movie. So basically, Connery is done with James Bond at 1983. At that stage, he was, 50, in his early 50s, 53 or something. But then in The Rock, he kind of played 1996 The Rock, which financially one of his most successful movies. I mean, that The Rock, co-starring Nick Cage, directed by Michael Bay. The Rock, I mean, that was really a mega hit, which basically proved that Connery was still, at the very top superstar in the mid to late 1990s. That movie made, I think, $330 million US. In today's money, that's more like close to 700 million. So in that movie, he kind of played a older version James Bond. Basically, Connery could never escape Bond. Bond is Connery, Connery is Bond, and those two are synonymous. So even though, he tried to diversify, and successfully, like he won an Academy Award for The Untouchables in, 1986? That was his only Academy Award, but a big feather in his cap. you know, he's very successful in a bunch of other movies, but people will always remember him, just like people will always associate Indiana Jones with Harrison Ford or Han Solo. And so Connery, you know, maybe in the middle of his career he was frustrated about, you know, the always being typecast as Bond, or, you know, people only talking about Bond. But I think towards the end of his career, you know, he really appreciated it and enjoyed it and played it up. As you could see in that Dave Letterman skit, 1993, I think he was promoting Rising Sun then. And, you know, connection with Rising Sun and You Only Live Twice. So in You Only Live Twice, Connery famously goes in disguise as Japanese and marries a Japanese wife, a traditional Japanese wedding. And then in Rising Sun, Connery plays a, you know, Japanese expert. He's lived in Japan. He speaks Japanese. He's living in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles, and he's the first time you see him at the beginning of the movie, Wesley Snipes' character goes to meet him. I think it is. It's been a long time since I've seen Rising Sun, but from what I recall, you know, he's got this kind of beautiful geisha woman that he's sleeping with when Wesley Snipes goes to, you know, knock on his door in his traditional Japanese apartment. So connection there, Rising Sun, You Only Live Twice. But Connery could never get away from Bond, and that's why, partly why I was so happy with Entrapment. And yeah, of course, it's a heist movie. He's an art thief, a diamond thief. You know, he's not playing a spy. But because in Entrapment, everyone is kind of double-crossing. Everyone's like a double agent. Double agent in the sense that you're not sure who's trying to steal from who, and who's working for the police and who's working for themselves. I mean, of course, this movie is really mostly about Connery's Mac and Zeta-Jones Gin. So those two totally steal the show. But I would say Ving Rhames, Thibodeau, also a key character, you know. And those three, you're never quite sure who's working for who, because, you know, at the beginning it seems like Thibodeau is working for Mac, but then you realize it's the other way around, and then you're not sure who's trying to steal from who between Zeta-Jones and Connery's characters. So there's double crossing, triple crossing, those three characters. I mean, it gets quite confusing, maybe for people who are used to reading, you know, mystery detective novels, or people who have watched every heist movie ever made. Then they might not think so. But for me, the movie definitely kept me thinking from beginning to end, especially the first time I watched it at a cinema, and a very satisfying experience back then. And, you know, back in the late 1990s, yeah, it seemed like Connery could go on forever. I mean, I think Connery's best eras were the 1960s as James Bond. He made 5 movies in the 60s? Yeah, he did one in the 70s, one in the 80s, so 5 times he was Bond in the 60s, and he was in some other good movies like Marnie, by that Hitchcock movie. And then I feel like from The Last Crusade, 1989, to Entrapment, that 10-year run, so basically the 1990s, I feel like, yeah, the 60s and 90s were Connery's best years. So he basically had kind of 2 separate careers. I mean, he never stopped working. He was in a lot of great movies, or movies that other people love. You know, like The Man Who Would Be King with his best friend, or one of his best friends, Michael Caine, 1975. Many people consider that his best movie. I watched it a long time ago. Probably I should give it a rewatch. But yeah, I kind of took it for granted that Connery would just keep on going. So, you know, even though he was an old guy, playing an old guy, but in retrospect, you know, this was his last hurrah, and definitely his last hurrah playing a kind of cool spy character, basically playing a James Bond character. And apparently the director or cinematographer, there's a half a second scene in the movie where the numbers 007 appear. I can't spot it, but apparently there is somewhere in the movie, if you freeze frame everything every half a second, you'll see 007. The directors and producers, they definitely were, leaning into the idea of Connery was still playing a Bond-type character. If you're a fan of Connery as Bond and you haven't seen Entrapment yet, you really should check it out. For me, this is much, much better than Never Say Never Again, and much better than Diamonds Are Forever. So to me, this is the best, Connery Bond movie since You Only Live Twice, 1967 to 1999. As for the recent Bond movies, Daniel Craig, good actor. I really loved Casino Royale. I think most people consider that one of the best James Bond movies. And, Daniel Craig surprised a lot of people because people say, you can't have a blonde Bond. And before Casino Royale, Daniel Craig hadn't really proven himself. I mean, had a few, Layer Cake, I think, was, his most well-received role, and he'd been in Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie, but kind of just a love interest. So Casino Royale, Daniel Craig was amazing, but I guess the big complaint with the subsequent Daniel Craig Bond movies, especially the last couple, a lot of people love Skyfall. I definitely like aspects of it, but overall a bit depressing. And then when you talk about depressing, No Time to Die, was that 3 years ago? That was a major bummer. Major bummer for many reasons, but the biggest one being that Bond dies at the end of the movie. So didn't like that. And, they're just not as playful. I mean, Daniel Craig always seemed a bit too serious. It was very difficult to get the balance right because people said that, Roger Moore was too goofy and too many jokes. And then I liked Pierce Brosnan because I grew up in the 90s, and Pierce Brosnan was a great James Bond, I thought. But Daniel Craig, much more serious, and even though, he has some good moments with some of the, femme fatales and the leading actresses, he doesn't have Connery's charm. Like, even though Connery, famously quite rough with the women, I mean, I won't go into it too much, but he said something on an interview with Barbara Walters, which was very controversial. And there is one scene in Entrapment which I don't like, which is where he's dipping Zeta-Jones' head in and out of the water. I think they could have done that scene differently. It could have been like a gun to the head, even though a gun to the head is also very violent. I just didn't like seeing him grab her by the head and push her under the water several times. But what I was saying is that Connery said some controversial things about women, and, he's very much a man of his era. And speaking of his education, he dropped out of school when he was 12, but, women loved Connery, and you feel that Connery loved women. Like, he was very playful with them, I do think Connery respected women, but, not in the current era way. But anyway, Connery always got on great with his female co-stars, or that's what I've heard. And, no wonder Zeta-Jones, she loved working with Connery. And so with Daniel Craig, you don't really have that sense of fun flirtation with the women. I mean, Daniel Craig is a good actor. I think actually Daniel Craig is better in the detective stories, like he's been doing those Knives Out movies. He had Glass Onion a couple of years ago. I think that role is a much better fit for Daniel Craig. But Casino Royale, amazing movie, and Daniel Craig was great in that one. So, sorry, too many tangents, but basically Entrapment, one of the best James Bond movies, even though it's not a James Bond movie. And if you haven't watched it, you should check it out. But I'll definitely have spoilers, and I've probably already said some spoilers, so perchance someone is listening to this long review, and if you've seen my other videos, you know I ramble on. I can't. I try to cut these reviews shorter, but yeah, I'm a chatterbox, so hopefully I can keep it on the rails. And if you haven't watched it, you should watch it, and if you haven't watched it, you should probably click off now. But I think anyone watching my reviews generally would be fans of the movie already. So if you watch the Romancing the Stone one I did, or 6 Days, 7 Nights, or Ace Ventura, you've probably seen the movie, so maybe you're just curious to hear what someone else has to say. So hopefully I provide you with some new trivia or viewpoints on the movie. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you disagree. It's interesting that this connection with the last Bond movie Connery did came out in 1983, as I said, Never Say Never Again, and Octopussy. Octopussy won the box office war, so people expected that, you know, Connery would be more popular, but actually Roger Moore, his movie made a bit more in 1983. So, you know, it's another reason why Never Say Never Again seemed like a bit of a bad note to end on for Connery as Bond. However, in 1999, so fast forward 16 years later, at that stage, Pierce Brosnan was Bond, and I think he was on to his third movie as Bond. I think he played Bond 4 times. Actually, I really liked Pierce Brosnan as Bond. I wish he'd made more movies. I don't know why they fired him or they didn't offer him more money, but I thought he was great and should have continued. But anyway, 1999, there was a Bond movie that came out starring Pierce Brosnan, and he was in the Thomas Crown Affair, and the Thomas Crown Affair was a remake of a movie that came out in the early 70s, I believe, starring Steve McQueen, and actually Sean Connery was in talks to star in that movie. I think he wanted to be in that movie, but maybe there was some schedule clash, but anyway, it went to Steve McQueen. So you have 1999 James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, and you have Sean Connery, who could have played could have been in the original Thomas Crown Affair, and then you have Pierce Brosnan in a remake of that movie the same year, and people expected that the Thomas Crown Affair would make more money, but in fact it went the other way. So it was a complete flip on what happened in Never Say Never Again and Octopussy. Expectations flipped again. Actually, Entrapment made $212 million on a $70 million budget, but actually the movie only cost $68 million. So they basically, Connery was a executive producer. He was very hands-on with Entrapment, and he decided to save money. I'm not sure how much he was paid. I think he was paid $17 million for A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but because he was very heavily involved in Entrapment, he was trying to save costs, so he flew on commercial aircrafts. He didn't take private jets, and he drove his own car. And so surprisingly, Entrapment came in under budget, $68 million it cost, and made $212 million. And in today's money, that's closer to $400 million, I think. I don't know. I'm not a accountant, mathematician, but it was a good amount of money, and it made more money than the Thomas Crown Affair. A lot of people consider the Thomas Crown Affair a better movie. And, you know, maybe in a debate, if you talked about the scripts and broke it down, you know, there's a good case to be made for the Pierce Brosnan Thomas Crown Affair being a better movie, and especially for people who really dislike the, you know, massive age gap. So some people just think that's wrong to have a 69-year-old and a 30-year-old as, you know, lovers. But there's no sex scene in Entrapment. There are plenty of sexy scenes. Zeta-Jones, yeah, you get to see a lot of her. I mean, there's no real nudity, but very, very close. You know, she's naked under the sheets, and you get to see her curves in several scenes, especially the training montage where she's weaving in and out of these, you know, laser beams, and that scene a bit voyeuristic. Looks like a scene that, Hitchcock would have loved to have filmed, because, famously Hitchcock was very voyeuristic and loved to cast beautiful women and show them off as best he could. And back in Hitchcock's era, the censors, what was it, the Hays Code, they were very strict, and he was, kind of ingenious how he managed to just weave the line on the edge of what was acceptable. But no sex scene, entrapment, and no actual nudity. But yeah, you can basically see Zeta-Jones's incredible body. Actually, originally, when the movie was first proposed, I think it was like 96, they came up with the first draft. The original idea was that the movie was going to be much more expensive. I think it was going to be a $120 million budget. So they cut the budget by almost half in the end. And as I said, it made a lot of money. Very successful movie. But the original movie had a lot more action. So Entrapment, if you're a fan of action movies, you might be a bit disappointed. So if you wanted to see Connery's last great action movie, then I'd say The Rock, Michael Bay movie with Nick Cage. That is much more of a, legit action movie. Entrapment, not so much, but there is, some great set pieces, especially with the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur at the end of the movie. Very, very thrilling, scary, exciting scenes that I don't know if there was CGI involved there. I did hear there was a miniature model. I mean, they actually used the towers, the real Petronas Towers. They're still the tallest twin towers in the world. At that time, it was the tallest buildings. I mean, twin towers, tallest buildings in the world. So from 1998 until 2004, I think they held the record. Now, of course, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai has had the record for many, many years. But I checked up the rankings now. The Petronas Towers are ranked 21 and 22. I mean, there's two towers, so they're not even in the top 20 tallest buildings in the world anymore. But they were for 6 years around the millennium. So that climax is very, very exciting, and there's some great action there. But overall, the movie is much less action than The Rock, and much less action than it was originally intended to be. So the first draft of Entrapment, it involved some incredible chase scene on a luxury train, maybe like a nod to Murder on the Orient Express, but more like James Bond style perhaps, because a lot of James Bond movies, you have scenes where they're running across trains and on the rooftops and jumps and whatnot. So it was originally supposed to cost $120 million, and also the first draft of the movie, it was supposed to take place in Hong Kong in 1997, when the handover from the British handover to the Chinese, and I kind of like that idea. I mean, I'm living in Japan now. I lived in China for 3 years. I love Hong Kong. I've been to Kuala Lumpur a couple of times too. I like Kuala Lumpur as well, and great airport there. But Hong Kong is a much more dramatically beautiful city. I mean, I think Hong Kong is a great backdrop for movies. Used very well in Hong Kong. Used very well, of course, in the Bruce Lee movies. Enter the Dragon, filmed beautifully there. In the second Tomb Raider movie with Angelina Jolie and Jared Butler, there's a cool scene in Hong Kong. The Dark Knight, I think the beginning of The Dark Knight, they filmed in Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong is just one of the most dramatic cities in the world. I've never been to Rio de Janeiro, but, Rio de Janeiro's got that amazing backdrop with Sugarloaf Mountain and, the rocks, the cliffs, the jungle, beautiful beaches. And in Hong Kong, you've got Victoria Peak, you've got these amazing mountains, you've got the island, you've got the harbour, Hong Kong Bay, and, you've got all these skyscrapers. skyscrapers surrounded by, forest jungle and these dramatic mountains and rocks. So I like the idea of them filming it. And also I'm fascinated with history, and so I don't think there were any movies filmed in Hong Kong, any Hollywood movies around 1997. I saw some BBC specials around that time. A lot of people were curious, is Hong Kong going to change for the better or for the worse? And definitely an end of an era. And also around that time, I think it was 1997, the old Hong Kong airport closed. I forgot the name of that airport, but it was considered, one of the most dramatic major airports in the world because it was so close to the city centre, and you have these, jumbo jets, 747s flying low over the kind of shanty towns. Now all that's gone. I believe the old airport in Hong Kong is now full of like sports stadiums. They've just built a new mega stadium, like football place. But as with my interest in China, interest in Asia, and my love of Hong Kong and the scenery there, the history, the colonial history and everything, for me, possibly that would have been a movie I'd enjoy even more. But they scrapped that idea, and I do understand why they scrapped that idea. It was supposed to be, instead of stealing money at the end of Entrapment from the International Clearance Bank in Kuala Lumpur, it was supposed to be some Chinese bank, but it does make more sense that they decided to go with the Y2K thing. So the whole thing with the Y2K, the millennium bug, was that all these computers were programmed in the 1960s and 1970s, and back then it was very expensive and complicated to program the old computers. And my dad is a computer engineer, or he's retired now. I remember in the early 80s going to his workplace and seeing these massive computers, and like a disk was bigger than this computer screen, these massive disks that they had. So this, like the size of your kitchen, was one of these computers. That was in the early 1980s. But when they were programming these early computers in the 1960s, apparently it was too expensive and too complicated to put in 4 digits. So that if it was, the computer was programmed in, say, 1965, they just put in 65. And then the big worry with the millennium bug, the Y2K bug, was that in the year 2000 it would go to 00, and all these computers would be confused. There would be things at 1900, is it 2000, like 2 zeros. So by only having those 2 digits at the end, a lot of governments, banks, financial centers, they were concerned that all these infrastructure would crash. So across the world, many governments, banks, financial institutions, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to correct this. So they became aware of this during the mid-1990s, as the countdown to the end of the millennium came. This became a big talking point. And so it's smart that they changed the script from the Hong Kong handover from the British to China 1997, instead make it, and also like with the timing of the movie coming out, I don't think they could finish the movie by 1997. So it had to be, the timing was very important. And so this movie came out, I think, in May. Entrapment came out in May 1999, and then so it was like kind of countdown. It was a great, exciting way to sort of start 1999 because everyone was talking about this Y2K bug. I mean, personally, I didn't care. When I say I didn't care, I was 21 years old. I didn't have any money. I was a university student. So, if all the banks collapsed, back then I was just young, dumb, and financially broke. So, now I might worry more about the state of economics. But anyway, it didn't happen. So they fixed the bugs. They spent all that money. But the idea in the movie is that this clearance bank, there's like a 30-second gap because they're worried that the computers would crash, being confused. Is it 1900 or is it the year 2000? So there was supposed to be like a 30-second window on New Year's Eve where Catherine Zeta-Jones' character Jin came up with the idea to steal $8 billion. And, initially she wanted to keep, was it $7 billion? She wanted to have the record. There's this idea of this competition between them. So she admires, Mac because he's this legendary thief, and, part of her initial attraction to him before the sexual attraction, I guess, is this idea that she, this is her hero. She's always looked up to him as this elderly statesman, thief who lived this amazing career that she wants to. So she finally gets to meet her hero, but her hero, he's a man, she's a woman, and yeah, he's Connery, she's Zeta-Jones. What can you say? Somehow it works. Very good-looking couple, and you see on the poster for the movie, they show his face, and he has this amazing voice. And what is it about Connery's face? Because he does look like an old man. He has this kind of grandfather look about him, but maybe it's the eyebrows. I think Connery looked better in the 90s than he did in the 70s and 80s. So apparently the studio wasn't happy with the $120 million budget, and so they said, no, there's no way we're going to make this movie. You have to cut it down. They cut it down to $70 million, and then Connery managed to save a bit more money, so it eventually only cost $68 million. But he also wasn't happy with the first draft because he thought there was too much action, and he wanted it to be a more, thought-provoking heist movie, more of a cat and mouse play. So I think it was actually, partly Connery's decision that there was less action. I mean, he wanted to keep some action, of course, but for him, he wanted the banter, he wanted the witty lines. The movie definitely, has some witty lines. Some of the lines are a bit corny. He's always saying, there's several times in the movie where, or maybe 2 or 3 times where he says, I'm never late. He keeps, he's very punctual. If I'm late, I'm dead. And especially it's cheesy at the end of the movie because by that time, they've kind of fallen in love with each other. He's made it clear to her that it's not going to be sexual, but by the end of the movie, that they love each other. They can't kind of deny their feelings. And she's dropped her parachute. So they have these 2 mini parachutes. This is the plan B. They pull off the heist. They get the $8 billion. It all transferred electronically. There's a funny line where he jokes about, back in my day, cash was, tangible. And so I think that's partly why this movie still has aged pretty well, because now everything they're talking about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and cash. A lot of countries are going cashless. I'm not a fan. I guess I'm retro. I'm old school. I like things that are tangible. Like the painting behind me, binoculars. I like things that I can touch, like this wooden art piece from Japan. And that's one reason why I'm disappointed with the current crop of action adventure movies. Too much CGI, too much computer grain, and I think I much prefer even the very old adventure movies where they had the matte paintings in the background. So big fan of tangible stuff. And in Entrapment, I think there was 1 or 2 scenes where they used CGI, but I couldn't spot it. Surprisingly, there's a miniature model. So one of the scenes where I guess they're hanging from the tower. I mean, of course, they didn't actually make Connery and Zeta-Jones hang from this 100-story building, but they did several of their stunts apparently, especially Zeta-Jones, like a lot of the acrobatics and all the weaving in and out with her shapely body. Apparently that was mostly done by her. But there's some scene with the towers at the end where they use the miniature. So I'm a big fan of practical effects, and to me, Entrapment, it really entails, the best of 90s cinema because, it's aged well. It doesn't feel too old. I mean, it's a good thing that they hardly show any phones. There is one scene with a payphone, which is kind of a quaint old payphone near Connery Mac's castle. She goes off to talk to her boss, Hector. But I can't recall seeing any cell phones. And of course, this is many years before. It's about 10 years before iPhones became a big thing. When did iPhones come out? 2007. So it's about 8 years before iPhones. But now everything's smartphones. So some of those old spy movies from the 80s and 90s, they really look old because of the technology involved. And Never Say Never Again, the computer game sequence with is it Largo, Connery and Largo. That's a kind of a Pac-Man thing. That's aged kind of badly. But Entrapment, for some reason, it still looks very fresh, even though the Petronas Towers, no longer the tallest building in the world. They're not even in the top 20 anymore. But I think this is a movie that has legs, and if you're watching it now, you could appreciate it, and it still looks cool. Oh yeah, by the end of the movie, they're not really hiding the fact that they both have strong feelings for each other, because just before the big heist scene with the Petronas Towers, there's a moment where Mac steals the Chinese mask, which Jin has to use to pay off somebody, this creepy art dealer guy. What was his name? Maury Chalkin. And his character is really gross. So he's like all sweaty. He looks like a kind of Jabba the Hutt kind of figure. I mean, it's kind of memorable. It's not exactly clear. Jin's character, she needs to get this, ancient Chinese mask thing to pay him off. But that goes badly because Connery's Mac, he's stolen the mask, and there's this scene where she's really pissed off at Mac and they're arguing. She's screaming at him, but then he basically grabs her and they kind of hug, and there's this very tender moment where they're holding hands, and I guess just this it's very well played. I think you feel in that moment that they do love each other. Again, no sex, and she's kissing him. I mean, they both kiss, but then she's really getting into it, and I believe she's very believable in that scene. But he tells her he can't. I mean, a lot of bad jokes about that scene when Connery kind of says no, I can't, and so I've listened to other movie reviews where they say, the Viagra won't kick in or whatever, but he says, it's too complicated. Just, she asks him to explain why they can't, get it on. And he just says, I'm sorry. But at least in that moment, she knows that he loves her, that she feels his love. So it's very clear by the end of the movie that they love each other, but it's not going to go romantically the way she wants. But he keeps saying that, I'll meet you at this place. So they've lost one of their parachutes. He had this plan B that they both have these miniature parachutes. She dropped her one. The heist didn't quite go perfectly. I mean, it was going perfectly until she unplugged her computer. That triggered the security system. Then there's this very dramatic, towering inferno scene, very thrilling, scary. And they must have used stunt doubles, but I don't know how they filmed that exactly. But it was very well done. And on the edge of your seat, it's incredibly scary. You feel the wind when they're hanging by this wire that's barely hanging in there. And then finally, Connery comes up with the idea. The only way they can, escape the authorities is if she jumps through this air vent thing. And fortunately, the miniature parachute is just the right size to open up in that air vent. And he says, I can't go with you. She says, we have to go together. He says, no, we'll drop like a rock, because he's clearly, a heavy guy. I don't know. Connery probably weighed close to 90 kilograms. I mean, a very tall man. I think he was 188 centimeters. And, he was, very muscular, but especially at that age, he was also had a fair amount of heft on him, a fair belly on him. So he's probably 90 kilograms. But he tells her, no way, you have to go alone. She understands. They have another kiss. But he says, I'll meet you tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. at this Pudor train station. And, if I'm not there at 6 a.m. on the dot, then I'm dead. And it's like as if that's supposed to give her any comfort, because that's the thing she's worried about, that he's going to be arrested and whatever. So that was a cheesy line. I think the word entrapment only comes up once in the movie, and this is early on where, they're playing this cat and mouse thing, and then basically Connery tricks her into going along with his heist idea, and she's pissed off, and she says, "This is entrapment," and he says, "No, entrapment is what cops do. This is called blackmail." And of course, it's not when I say it doesn't sound cool. Again, these actors, the way they deliver their lines, especially Connery, it's just so cool, the timing and everything. And then there's something where when she's trying to convince him that they have to do this heist exactly on New Year's Eve, 1999, and I guess this is they've arrived in Kuala Lumpur. They're in this little they're staying in this kind of shack, but it's got a nice view of the Twin Towers. And she says, "You want a beer?" Yeah. She goes off to get a beer for him, and she tells him the idea, and he said, "Oh, this is." She goes off to get a beer, and he said, "Oh, this will take, this idea of yours to get the $8 billion from the International Clearance Bank." He says, "This will take 3 weeks of preparation." And she says, no, it has to be tomorrow. So, they've got 1 day to prepare. And he has a sleepless night, trying to figure out how they're going to do this. I mean, she's partly figured it out, but he has to go through more details. And he says to her, it's impossible. And she's pissed off because she realizes that this is kind of a negotiation tactic, because she's very much about getting the record. She wants to hold the record alone, and she doesn't want to share the money. But then, so she slams the bottle or something, and then she says, "Oh, okay, 50-50, so then they can share the record." So I guess it's like $4 billion each. And then he said, "Oh, it's impossible, but doable." And at the end of the movie, when they finally meet at the train station, the very final scene, it's filmed, well, they say it's Pudor train station, but it was actually filmed at another train station. I don't know why they couldn't film at the real Pudor station, but there was basically a new metro line built in Kuala Lumpur. Probably, I actually think about it now, one of the reasons they filmed at the wrong train station was this new train line. Some of the stations had opened and some hadn't. So I think this was an extended part of the train line. I forgot the name of the station where they actually filmed it, but it's near some sports facilities. I mean, it looks really good. So you see the background with some kind of tent-like stadium structure, and then there's also some hills in the background with palm trees. And, Kuala Lumpur is quite an attractive city. As I said, I think Hong Kong is more dramatic because you've got those huge mountains in the background, but there are, these beautiful palm plantations and some hilly spots in Kuala Lumpur that make a nice backdrop. So the very, final moments of the movie are a little bit absurd. It gets quite complicated. So they meet up at the train platform, and then he's late. So she starts crying because she assumes that, he must have died. Because, he says, I'm never late unless I'm dead. He's 5 minutes late. And then she finally sees him and she's crying because, thank God he's arrived. Better late than never. He's finally there. But then he embraces her kind of strangely. And then she realizes, something's up. And then so he said, so you're a cop, are you? Because initially he's assuming that she's a cop. But no, you're the cop. And then there's this weird moment then, and you see the FBI agents, you see Hector and Thibault arrive behind them, and so she's kind of confused, and he's like, no, but I had to tell them everything. He explains to her that actually he was caught by Ving Rhames' character a couple of years earlier, and he says, they've been on to you for years. So she was basically playing both sides. You know, she was working for this insurance company, but she was also stealing. So she stole the Rembrandt at the beginning of the movie, and he stole it back from her. But she's working for the insurance company that's, you know, trying to figure out what happened to this Rembrandt. So basically, you know, the FBI and the insurance company, they figured out that she's basically behind all these robberies. And Connery's character had been caught a couple of years earlier by the FBI, and part of his parole deal was to catch her. And so there's this, I guess it's played out quite well. I mean, I do like the visuals of the final scene. You know, it's a cool way to end it, you know, a calm way to end it. So you've gone from the climatic, thrilling, scary moments on top of this tower, and then you go to this kind of serene scene where they're both kind of wearing, he's got a white suit on and she's got a white jacket on, and you've got this, you know, beautiful train station. I mean, you know, I like the backdrop. But then it's kind of confusing, and she's thinking quickly, like, you know, what's going on here? Oh, he does love me. Oh, he's not a cop, but he is turning me in. But then he says to her, yeah, I told them everything. I got to turn you in. I'm sorry. And so she realizes this is why, you know, he didn't want to physically screw her, because he was, you know, basically screwing her by turning her over to the authorities. So this is the entrapment side of it. I mean, he's not a cop, but he's working for the cops because the cops got him first. But he fell in love with her at some stage, and that's why, you know, he tries to call it off. He tells Ving Rhames' character, you know, it's off, you know, she's in over her head. But at that stage, Ving Rhames says, you know, sit the F down, you know, you're going to play it my way, you're not going to get out of this one. So, but then he says, you know, I told them everything. I told them about the 7 billion. And she's like, 7 billion? What about the other? And then she realizes that he's going to let her keep 1 billion. So, of course, she's happy about that. But then she has to think on her feet, and she's got a gun. She's got a gun that Hector gave her, Will Patton, is it? And a lot of people didn't like his casting because he's got a very, you know, southern accent. I mean, I don't know whereabouts in Will Patton is from. He's from North Carolina or something. But, you know, he's been in, I think he was in Dances with Wolves. He's been in some movies with Kevin Costner. And people had a problem with his name being Hector Cruz. I mean, I didn't care. I didn't know about these Latino names and whatever, but, you know, maybe they should have given his character a different name. He played his part well. I mean, he gets third billing in the movie. Ving Rhames gets fourth billing, but to me, the Ving Rhames character is much more important. I do think the 4 key characters are very well written, and, you know, so it's mostly the 1-2 show between Connery and Zeta-Jones, but then you have the secondary characters, Ving Rhames and Will Patton. And Will Patton not as memorable. Of course, Ving Rhames' character is very similar to his character in the Mission Impossible movies. And this movie, you know, definitely reminds you of Mission Impossible. I think the first Mission Impossible movie came out in 1996. So Tom Cruise, he's done 8 of those movies now. And I think Ving Rhames is the only other character that's been in every, you know, Mission Impossible. I think they've 8 of those movies. He's pretty old now. I think he's in his 70s. But so this came out 2 years after the first Mission Impossible movie, and Ving Rhames, very cool. But I think also Will Patton's Hector character is well written. So it's clear that he loves Zeta-Jones, and who makes sense. I mean, I think Connery, you know, maybe fell in love with Zeta-Jones a little bit. You know, I don't think there was any real romance between them, but they're definitely playing well off each other. There is some sizzling chemistry there. And yeah, it's also believable that Zeta-Jones would fall for an older man because Michael Douglas, one of my favorite actors, I mentioned Romancing the Stone, previous movie review, and another favorite Michael Douglas movie, Falling Down. Michael Douglas and Zeta-Jones, they were in Traffic together in the year 2000, Steven Soderbergh movie. They don't appear in any scenes together, but they are in that same movie. But Douglas started wooing Zeta-Jones in mid-98 because he was a big fan. He saw an early screening of The Mask of Zorro, and apparently he said to somebody, I have to marry that woman. I have to father her children. And somehow he set up a meeting. I think it was actually through his friend Danny DeVito. Good friend Danny DeVito, Michael Douglas, they go back. They were roommates, 1970s in New York. They were together in Romancing the Stone. And Danny DeVito directed War of the Roses, starring Michael Douglas, Kathleen Turner. So what I read is that Danny DeVito introduced them at some film premiere. And I think, his pickup line to Zeta-Jones, or on their first date maybe, was, I have to father your children or something. So very, very forward. Looking briefly at the film careers of Catherine Zeta-Jones and okie dokie. So apparently, her big break was in this TV show, The Darling Buds of May. I never saw it, but this is very popular in the UK in the early 1990s. But she took, several years for her to get a big Hollywood breakout. I mean, she was in a movie, Christopher Columbus, The Discovery, 1992, and that starred Marlon Brando. By all accounts, that was a terrible movie. I think it's got a 0 rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it was a box office bomb. But if you're a fan of Zeta-Jones's assets, so to speak, apparently there's a scene of her topless in that movie. So I don't know why I know that, but basically The Mask of Zorro came out in 98. That was her big, big break. And so she was 28 years old at that stage. So, kind of a late bloomer. So she had that TV career in the UK, and she'd been in a few movies. There's a movie I want to watch again that came out in 1996 called The Phantom, starring Billy Zane, and apparently Zeta-Jones is a femme fatale. I say apparently because I watched that movie long time ago, but it was somewhat inspired by Indiana Jones. I mean, of course, The Phantom was a comic book, serial from the 1960s, I think it was. But I do like Billy Zane. Billy Zane, first watched him in Dead Calm, 1989. Billy Zane was incredible as the antagonist in Titanic. I don't know why Billy Zane's career didn't take off after Titanic, but it seems like his career was kind of at a sweet spot there. So he played the Phantom. That was a big budget adventure movie, and Catherine Zeta-Jones, she's in that. I want to rewatch that, so I don't have a copy of the Phantom, but I will look for one. And Roger Ebert praised the Phantom. So filmed in Thailand, filmed in Australia, and connection with Billy Zane and Nicole Kidman. So those two, their breakout movie roles were in Dead Calm, co-starring with Sam Neill. Sam Neill, of course, Jurassic Park. Because Nicole Kidman was originally supposed to play opposite Sean Connery in Entrapment. I don't know why she dropped out. I think maybe something to do with they reduced the budget. So as I said, originally Entrapment was supposed to cost $120 million, the first draft, and have much more action, car chases and shootouts. And I do like the fact that there are no shootouts in Entrapment. I mean, do they use any guns? Maybe there's a bit of shooting with security guards. No, I don't think they actually shoot, because they're told to catch them alive. So Yeah, my only major gripe with the movie is that one scene where Connery is, dunking Zeta-Jones' head up and down, almost drowning her. It's just, I don't know. It's just I don't like seeing her almost drown and it's holding her by the hair. It's not nice. I think they could have done that scene better. Like having a gun to her head, even though gun to the head also very violent. But I do like the fact that does anybody die in the movie? I don't think anybody dies in the movie. So it's very much a James Bond movie to my thinking. But it's a very non-violent movie, and yeah, maybe that's partly how the budget came down. Some of those action scenes were cut out. They recast, so Nicole Kidman was supposed to play opposite Connery, and she probably would have done great. It's ironic that now Nicole Kidman, how old is she? I think she's close to 60 or late 50s, and she's playing opposite much younger men. As I mentioned, there's a movie came out this year with Zac Efron, and I guess he's in his early 30s, she's almost 60. So now that's flipped around. Now you're getting movies where some older women are playing opposite younger men. But definitely Zeta-Jones was the best choice. I mean, of course, biased. I guess I should be biased towards Nicole Kidman because I'm Australian, she's Australian, and, big fan of Nicole Kidman. She's had an amazing career. Happy for her, but Connery, Zeta-Jones, these two are just magic in this movie. Yeah, it is a weird vibe. I mean, she's definitely pursuing him more, kind of like Audrey Hepburn pursuing Cary Grant's character. And, creepy, whatever. I mean, it just works. It's a one-off. I don't think no other actor you could cast would this work. I mean, of course, now there are actors like Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise. They're in their 60s, and they still look good. But I don't want to see them with a much younger actress in a movie like this. I feel like Connery was an absolute one-off, and he looks old. He's playing his age, but yeah. And Zeta-Jones, she was a one-off. Like, you kind of can't tell her age. She's not 20 years old, but she's around 30. You can't tell she's over under 30. Like, in some ways, she's you think that she's both younger and older than her character. I mean, younger because she has this, incredible skin, porcelain skin, and she has this playfulness, and she's definitely like a girl crush on Connery's character, and the way she's, with the scene in her when she's naked under the sheets, and she's definitely trying to seduce him. But on the other hand, I guess maybe it's the way she speaks. I mean, she's Welsh. She has this very kind of posh, sexy, husky accent, and she's very worldly. So it's kind of not clear what her age is, but whatever. I've probably talked too much about that. This is a one-off, and if you're a fan of Connery, if you're a fan of James Bond, this is the movie I wish he'd retired on, even though Finding Forrester, also a good movie. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, that's become a bit of a cult hit. It's a lot of people say it's boring. I would probably rewatch that at some point just because I love Sean Connery. But yeah, this is basically the 90s ended with a bang. This is the perfect movie to end the 90s on. This is the perfect movie to end Connery's career on. And I think it's a bit underrated. I mean, I know the movie has its fans, and I've seen a few other reviews on YouTube. People who were thrilled by this movie in the cinema back when it came out in 99, and watching it decades later, it holds up. But I'd say it's underrated because it's a movie that's not really talked about. I mean, I think it's much, much better than many of the Mission Impossible movies. I think it's much better than most of the Daniel Craig movies, except Casino Royale. Connery had an incredible run. I think I mentioned a bit earlier, to me, Connery basically had two eras where he was totally awesome. 1960s awesome James Bond, early Bond, Connery, and we're at the peak of his physical peak, and you know, his debonair, sexy, super spy era. And then you have the 90s, basically starting with his Last Crusade character playing Indiana Jones' father. So 1989 to 99, that 10 years. And of course, that's how I remember Connery, because that's when I was a teenager and I was going to the cinema. Of people my age, they said that they were introduced to Connery from the James Bond movies. I was introduced to Connery from The Last Crusade. And so my dad wasn't a big James Bond fan, but I guess he was enough of a James Bond fan that he was keen to watch The Last Crusade with me at the cinema. So like I remember in 1989, the two movies I was really looking forward to were Batman with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson, and The Last Crusade with Ford and Connery. And my dad wasn't interested in Batman, but he was excited to see The Last Crusade with me at the cinema because he was a Connery fan, because he grew up with James Bond. And so that's basically where I was introduced to Connery. Yeah, later I went on to see some of the other movies that Connery made in the 80s. The Name of the Rose, that was a great one with Christian Slater. Actually, I watched The Name of the Rose at school. I think that was in a history class we watched. I don't know why my history teacher showed us that movie. Probably just trying to waste a bit of time before summer holidays, summer vacation. Highlander, that was a movie that Connery enjoyed. But, you know, Connery, he took off basically between Never Say Never Again, 1983, and Highlander, 1986. He took off almost 3 years there because he was so disappointed with how Never Say Never Again turned out. But Connery wasn't disappointed with Entrapment. He said of movies in the 90s, the two that he was most proud of were The Rock and Entrapment. And I would say those were his two best movies in the 90s. Third one would be Rising Sun, but that got mixed reviews. Anyway, I've talked way too long, as usual. Sorry for my rambling. If you haven't watched the movie for many years, watch it again. It definitely holds up. And if you haven't ever watched it, what are you waiting for? You're missing out. You're in for a good time. You're in for a treat, because Entrapment, incredible spy heist movie. Enjoy. Have a good one. Take it easy. Thanks for listening. Ciao.
Ladies and gentlemen, please say hello to one of my favorite actors, Sean Connery. Sean Connery. Oh, boy. Wow. Where can I get me one of them jetpacks?
I just came from Europe.
That was very thrilling. Did you enjoy that?
Well, my voice is about 2 tones higher, but apart from that.
A snug fit, eh?
Yeah.
You didn't get that jetpack at the electronics store around the corner, did you?
Yeah, Charlie gave it to me.
That I can't get over what an impression that makes when you just drop down there in that cloud of smoke. How you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine. I'm really here to sort of quell these rumors about my death.
Oh, really? Have there been rumors that you have passed away?
Yeah, something like that.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, well, I was too, until I heard that it's good luck in the Orient to consider that you when they say you've been announced dead and you're still alive, it means longevity.
Oh, well, good. Congratulations, then.
No, what happened, basically, it's a bit of a farce, like most things. Dear friend of mine, James Hunt, the racing driver, he died.
World champion.
He lived near me in Marbella, and it was picked up as James Bond. And then it went on to the press, and then it was picked up in Japan the same day that the ex-governor of Texas,
John Connolly. Yeah.
But then, of course, John Connolly is like Sean Connery in Japanese. And this is absolute gospel. And then it went to France and Spain, and people were phoning up all over, and very few people ever know where I am, even me, And anyway, that was the sort of finale of that one.
And you say very few people ever really know where you are, and you say you're not sure, but really, where are you? Where does a guy like you hang around? Where you live in Spain most of the time?
Well, I was up there for 20 minutes.